I wanted to start off by examining the difference between buying versus renting your primary residence or the place that you live. In the Western world, it's one of the tenets of being a good participant in the economy that you own your home. You often hear about things like the American dream of homeownership, and in recent history, Canada actually had usurped the US in having the ability to deliver that dream to Canadians. So I wanted to start off the discussion by examining whether or not buying real estate is even the right thing to do. And the easiest way to do that is to look at buying your primary residence versus renting your primary residence or the place that you live. This is actually one of the most highly debated topics in the real estate world, which is trying to understand which is the right thing for you. It really depends on how good you are at investing in other things than real estate. See, standard investing advice would tell you that you have to save a percentage of your income and then invest that in appreciating assets that compound on a year-over-year basis. And for most Canadians, buying real estate is the best way that they're able to do this. Compounding is the repeated addition of interest payments to the principal invested over a period of time. The principal grows exponentially as each new payment of interest is added to it. The higher the number of compounding periods, or the longer that you own that asset, the greater the amount of compound interest will be. And so if you were to take your time-tested and true and most common investing advice that you'd find almost anywhere on the internet, it'll say, save a bunch of money and put that money into assets. And homeownership forces Canadians to do that. Every month that goes by where they're paying their mortgage, they're putting money into an asset that grows in value over time. The other advantage to investing in real estate through your primary residence is that it's tax advantaged. Earnings from capital appreciation on your primary residence in Canada are not subject to capital gains tax. They're exempt from capital gains tax. This means that any money that you earn from the appreciation of your primary residence, you would not have to pay income tax on the capital gains of that. So it's much different than other places like the US and other countries in the world. But it's also led us down a kind of dark path where we've commoditized housing, and Canadians now are financially incentivized to take on leverage and try and buy the biggest and most expensive primary residence that they can in order to try and maximize that tax-free capital gains investment exemption. And so this is where we want to draw the distinction between whether or not your home is, by all technical standards, an investment or a liability. And the truth is, it probably falls somewhere in the middle. There are really two ways that you can look at this. The first way of looking at it is as a liability. And so if you were to read information from Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad, Poor Dad, he would argue that on a monthly basis, because you have to make a mortgage payment, it is technically a liability because it's a debt that needs to be paid. The second way of looking at it is as a savings vehicle or something that protects you from an opportunity cost. And that opportunity cost would be renting. So your home can either pay you rent if you were to rent it out to a tenant, or it pays you rent that you would otherwise have to pay if you were renting from a landlord yourself. If you look at a chart of the Canadian household savings rate over time, you'll see that it's been in decline for recent history. Most Canadians aren't exceptionally good at saving money or investing. And I say that as somebody who fits into that category, because if you remember the story that I told at the beginning of this course, one of the reasons that buying a primary residence was so compelling to me is because I'm one of those people who isn't exceptionally good at saving money and isn't exceptionally good at investing either. And so real estate had been a great wealth building tool for me during that phase of my life. Something like 70% of Canadian household net worth is tied up in the primary residence. So I think that that's testament to the fact that many Canadians are using real estate as a wealth building tool, and not even just real estate as a wealth building tool, but their homes as a wealth building tool. So this has both benefits and advantages for an economy. One of the biggest disadvantages is that it takes a lot of capital that could otherwise be productive in the economy and puts it into the primary residence or people's households. And this is where you get to a point where something like 13% of Canadian GDP is made up of residential investment. Residential investment is basically real estate commissions and home renovation. But for individuals, having a lot of wealth tied up in the primary residence can be a good thing. Due to its low liquidity or how difficult it is to actually cash out of a home, real estate makes it easier for people to stay in invested assets. When it comes to investing, you'll often hear people make the statement that time in the market is much better than timing the market. And when it comes to the real estate asset, this is especially true. Holding real estate over the course of a mortgage term or a mortgage amortization is one of the big reasons that it's been such a great wealth building tool for the average Canadian home. Real estate is also considered to be an inflation hedge, which means that in an inflationary environment, it protects you against the devaluation of the currency. And so as much as we want to think that the value of real estate always goes up, as you often hear professionals in my industry say, what's more likely true is that the buying power of the dollar always goes down. And buying real estate is a great way to hedge against that. It can be a great way for you to protect yourself against the loss of purchasing power. The easiest way to think about this is think about things that cost money and then think about how the prices of those things go up. And then you can think about the house as almost like a cake that has all of these things baked into it. So it has lumber and labor and flooring and countertops. All of these are things, components that are subject to inflation, and they're all stuck in your house. And so if the value of those things goes up, the cost of replacing your house, or what appraisers call the replacement cost new, goes up. And this is how real estate is fulfilling that job of being an inflation hedge for the average Canadian homeowner. So now that we've looked at some of the more simple and sophisticated reasons that somebody might choose to invest in real estate, let's get an understanding for what it looks like for you as an individual and your own personal finances. The best way to do this is start by looking at budgeting or your personal budget. Your first step towards homeownership is figuring out how much you can afford as a down payment. And you have to remember, this is money that will be tied up in your house. It's stuck there until you either sell your house or the house goes up enough in value that you can pull equity out of it. And so with the capital that you're using for your down payment, you can't earn a return on it. You can't invest it. You can't put it in a savings account. It's really doing nothing for you other than securing the loan that you have on your home and creating comfort for the bank so that they're willing to lend you money in the form of a mortgage against your home. Beyond the opportunity cost of a down payment, you also have sunk costs like ongoing costs. And these are things that a lot of people, especially first-time home buyers, forget to include in their budgeting decision because they've never owned a home before and they don't know how much it costs on a monthly basis. These are things like property maintenance, lawn care, snow removal, repairs, even major capital expenditures that could come up, especially for younger generations and first-time home buyers who are buying a more depreciated housing stock from past generations. So imagine you buy a home and within 1 year of ownership, something major breaks, like a roof or a furnace, and you need to spend tens of thousands of dollars to fix that before you can continue using your home like you were before. I'm going to borrow an acronym from the commercial real estate space, which is TMI. And no, it doesn't stand for too much information. It stands for taxes, maintenance, and insurance. These are broadly the easiest expenses that you need to forecast for as a homeowner. So you need to pay property tax. You've probably heard the phrase death and taxes. If there's one thing you can rely on, it's that you will get a property tax bill from your municipality on a monthly or quarterly basis over the entire tenure of your home ownership. Property taxes are calculated based on something called a mill rate, which is a percentage, and they use that against an assessment, which is calculated by MPAC, the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation. MPAC assessments are revenue neutral. When MPAC assesses the value of every house in a municipality, the municipality takes their budget for the next year and they divide it by the assessments of all of those properties, and then they apply their mill rate to that. So if you were to say there's $100 million worth of real estate in your municipality and there's 100 houses and each of them are worth $1 million, that's how the tax base would be divided up. If one of those is worth $100,000 more and the other one is worth $100,000 less, then those owners would have 10% differences up or down respectively in their tax obligations to the municipality. The mill rate typically ranges from 0.5 on the low end to 2% on the high end. And this is a rate, a percentage that is applied to the value of your property that calculates how much tax you owe. The next major expense category that you need to think about is home insurance. And the biggest reason for this is you can't escape it. In every single mortgage contract, the lender demands that your home has an active insurance policy on it. And this is really more to protect them than it is to protect you. If the home burns down, for example, and you stop paying your mortgage around the same time, they would now have an empty lot with no house on it and a unpaid mortgage. When a bank lends you money, they typically are securing it against the value of the property and they want that value to be insured. The annual cost of a home insurance policy can range pretty greatly, but for the average type of home and value of home in the province of Ontario, it would be reasonable to expect to spend about $1,000 to $3,000 per year on home insurance. And if you want to make it far easier to get an exact number, head on over to the chatbot on the Valery website, and I'm sure that Valery would be happy to recommend to you a policy and budget that'll work best for you. So we've covered the T and the I components of TMI. Now let's talk a little bit about maintenance considerations. So you've got taxes, maintenance, and insurance. You have to consider how much time and resources you can allocate as an individual to home maintenance. And especially with busy young professionals and first-time home buyers and young families, we often tend to overestimate how much we're able to do. We want the big yard, we want the big lot, we want the big house, but we often don't want all the consequences that come with that. And so it's important to keep in mind that different housing styles come with varying maintenance responsibilities. For example, apartments and condos typically have little to no maintenance, as exterior upkeep is the responsibility of the building owner or management. You typically have to pay a fee for this privilege. You're basically outsourcing or almost renting the management of your building off of a condo corporation or a management company. This is where you hear the term condo fees, and these are fees that need to be paid on a monthly basis. One of the easiest ways to think about these condo fees is similar to the way that taxes are. When you pay property taxes, you're basically paying your municipality for a bunch of services. You're paying them to maintain the roads. You're paying them for a police force in some cases. You're paying them to take care of the parks. In a condo, they basically do the same thing, and you still have to pay property taxes, but you're also paying for the maintenance of the structure that gets you to your unit in that building. And also the maintenance of common amenities that are within the building, such as a pool or a party room. And it's important to note that if you don't pay these things, your taxes, your mortgage, or your condo fees, all of these parties can eventually force you to sell your property to pay them back with the equity that's in the home. So moving up the value chain from condominiums to townhouses, townhouses may require a little bit more maintenance than a condo, but you typically aren't paying as much in fees as you would in a condo. There are formats in between, which would be called a condominium townhouse, which kind of blends the best of both worlds. Townhouses being a ground-based product that has a backyard typically will require more maintenance than a condominium, which has no yard and a building that's managed by somebody else. A little bit further up the value and size chain from townhouses is semi-detached homes. And this is where you share a party wall with just one neighbor rather than more than one neighbor. In that case, you share some maintenance responsibilities with your attached neighbor, but you're generally responsible for the maintenance of all of your property. And so it costs you a little bit more than a townhouse, which costs you a little bit more than an apartment. And finally, we have detached homes. Detached homes require the most maintenance as you're responsible for the entire property because it's detached and the lot you own in its entirety in a fee simple ownership. It's also worth noting that you may not be able to tackle all of this maintenance yourself. And sometimes you may have to hire trusted contractors, and sometimes that's the best way to go about it, while keeping in mind the related costs of doing that. Before you take possession of a home, go out and get quotes from contractors to see how much it would cost to maintain that home, so you have an understanding of what those monthly maintenance costs are, even if you're going to do them yourself. One of the last pieces to think about in your budgeting process over the entirety of the ownership of the property is the resale value of the property and the liquidity of the property. When you're buying a house, you want to think about who you might be selling it to in the future. Is it a much more expensive home than the average home buyer can afford? Is it something where there's a growing market for this type of product? And will that market still exist in 10 years? One of the easiest ways to think about this is to understand why bungalows are so popular. Bungalows are accessible homes for downsizers or seniors. They're also easily duplexable homes for investors, and they're also typically very small homes, and so they're attractive to first-time home buyers. And so this is one of those homes that can be fail-safe or steadfast in its ability to maintain a market to sell that property to in the future. One of the easiest ways for most Canadians to think about buying versus renting is by comparing mortgage payments to average rent in a different market. We've made this pretty easy for you. You can go on the Valery website and plug in any property into the mortgage calculator, and it'll give you a monthly mortgage payment. And then you can also just ask the chatbot on the Valery website what the average rents are in the area that you'd be purchasing a home. For the most part, in areas where rents are lower than mortgage payments, that market would usually sway in the favor of renting being a better financial decision. On the other hand, in a market where mortgage payments are typically higher than rents, this means that it costs more to own a house than rent a house in that area on average. There are a couple more qualitative factors to consider, and then we're going to go through some market scenarios to get a better understanding of what's right for you.